Every day, the future's getting closer.
Welcome to Master the NEC, where we talk about the National Electrical Code and all things electrically related. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host, and welcome to today's podcast. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Master the NEC, where we talk about the National Electrical Code and all things electrically related. My name is Paul Abernathy, and welcome to today's podcast. Now, today's podcast, we are going to talk single-family dwellings because I'm getting a lot of requests to talk about the different components and different things that are associated with single-family dwellings. As more of a foundation for apprentices and journeymen to learn these concepts, as well as for people that are taking exams. And so today's episode, I want to target a certain area that tends to confuse people as well, and that's dealing with tap conductors when it comes to a single branch circuit for cooktops and wall-mounted oven applications. So we're going to kind of talk about that today and how the code utilizes certain areas in the code to help you understand what it means to have a cooktop and a wall-mounted oven actually on the same branch circuit, okay? And we'll talk through that and how to do that and give you some examples. All right, so this allows us to immediately jump to 210.19a3. Now, why are we in 210.19? Well, 210.19, obviously we're dealing with a branch circuit, and 210.19 dealing with conductors. And so we have branch circuits not more than 600 volts. So that's what we're dealing with here. We're talking about a normal cooktop and a wall-mounted oven that are on a single same branch circuit. And how do we make these taps? So what it is I'll have something coming in to, say, a junction box. And at that point, I'll have a junction box coming in, and I'm feeding one cooktop or one or two wall-mounted ovens from this one branch circuit, okay? And this is expressed to us when it's dealing, and they're in the same room, and this is what we talk about when we're going through our range calculations, when we're looking at table 220.55, and we look at note 4, and we're wondering what kind of application that is. And so we're going to talk about not doing the calculation. We're going to talk about what you actually do when it comes to the branch circuit, because it tends to provide confusion for people, and we want to clear that up. So in our case, let's just say we're dealing in an application where we have a one cooktop and one or two ovens. In this case, let's say we have one oven. It's same room, same location, right beside each other. There's going to be tap conductors coming from a junction box, okay? Okay, and there's no disconnection means it'll be required if the branch circuit switch or circuit breaker can be locked in the open off position when we're doing this. So that falls under the 110.25, which talks about the opposition, and of course that falls under 422.31b. But we're going to assume in this case it's simply coming into the bottom, it's hitting a junction box, it's going to have a blank cover on it, and then out of that junction box, I'm going to have the continuation of what we call tap conductors, one going to the cooktop, and then the other is going to the actual wall-mounted oven, okay? And it could be one or it could be two, but in this case, we'll just say it's just going to one or two. We'll just say it's just one for our understanding of how to apply the code. All right, so now we're dealing with that, and we know that the rules are going to allow us to do this under 210.19a3 exception. Now, why do we have to venture into the exception? Well, if you look at the general rule, it says, branch circuit conductors supplying household ranges, wall-mount ovens, counter-mounted cooking units, and other household appliances shall have an ampacity not less than the rating of the branch circuit and not less than the maximum load to be served. Well, okay. Well, without an exception to that, kind of doesn't leave our ability to be able to take one branch circuit and then split it off and feed multiple appliances in that. So we're hoping there's an exception there, and it is. But for the general rule that you really have to make sure that for household ranges, cooking appliances, your general branch circuit conductors that supply those has enough ampacity to actually handle that load to be served. Now, it goes on to remind us, and this is something that you usually will see on an exam. It says for ranges of 8 3/4 kW or more rating, it says the minimum branch circuit rating shall be 40 amperes. Okay, so if they have a question on an exam, it says what's the minimum branch circuit rating of an 8 3/4 kW, then you would say, 40 amperes. Okay, that is the minimum branch circuit rating. But now let's look at the exception. The exception that we're going to be dealing with is exception number 1. And exception number 1 says, and I'll kind of rephrase it to make it easier to understand. It says tap conductors from a 50 amp branch circuit must have an ampacity of at least 20 and not less than the ampacity of the individual unit served. Okay, that makes sense. It says these tap conductors, including any conductors that are a part of the pigtail supplied with the appliance that are smaller than the branch circuit conductors. The taps shall not be longer than necessary for servicing the appliance. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with here in the exception number 1. So if you look at the National Electrical Code, it actually says that exactly the way it is in here. It just says, look, I'm coming up to that junction box with my branch circuit, and now I'm tapping off. Well, it says, look, conductors that are tapped from a 50 ampere branch circuit, so that's a caveat to say that we need to have a 50 amp branch circuit there. Okay. It says tapped off from a 50 amp branch circuit supplying the electric range, wall mount ovens, and counter mounted cooking units shall have an ampacity of not less, okay, and these are the conductors that we're talking tapping off now, okay, they not less than 20 amperes, okay, so they can't be less than have an ampacity less than 20 amperes, and shall be sufficient for the load to be served. So it can't be less than 20 amperes. However, if the load to serve requires it to be a little larger than that, then it would have to be larger. Okay, but it can't be any less than 20 amperes. So we have our threshold. Okay, can't be less than that. All right, now it goes on again to say these tap conductors, including any conductors that are part of the lead supplied with the appliance that are smaller than the branch circuit conductors. Okay, these taps shall not be longer than necessary for servicing of the appliance. Okay, so the tap conductors that are coming from the appliance down, that usually sometimes they already come mounted with a whip and you take it into that junction box, they have to meet that as well, okay? And typically they're going to be at least large enough to service that load because they've been designed with that piece of equipment, okay? So typically they're going to easily be adequate for that. You just need to remember that when you tap the conductors from a 50 amp circuit, that they can't be less than 20 amperes and they have to be sufficient to handle the load. Typically, the part about being sufficient to handle the load is going to be covered by the manufacturer in that whip, and it should be adequate size. More often than not, I see the units that are being run for the ovens being at least a 10 gauge, and obviously adequate to be 20 amperes at that point. So that's usually not a concern. Okay, so that's the first thing that we want to make sure that we're keeping in mind. Now, where a single branch circuit feeds, again, one cooktop or two or more ovens, obviously in the same room, you're going to add the nameplate ratings of the appliances, and you're going to treat the total kW as one range, as found in table 220.55 and table 220.55 note 4. So you remember in our episode where we did ranges and the understanding and how you do that? Well, that's what you do. Okay, you take the nameplates, you add it up, and you treat it as one range, and that's how you apply the provisions of table 220.55. Okay, and so you understand the tap. The tap part is easy when you just wrap your head around it. Not smaller than 20 amperes, and it has to be at least adequate to handle the load served. Okay, and it's going to be from a 50 amp branch circuit that I'm making these taps from. Okay. Again, we talked about this is typically done in a junction box that's underneath the two appliances. And again, no disconnect mean is required. If the circuit breaker or the branch circuit switch can be locked in the open position. Okay. If that's the case, then I don't need any disconnection means here. Okay, because typically here you're not going to have a receptacle like you would with the normal range where you can pull it out. All right. So it is permissible, as we talked about it, to feed a cooktop and 1 or 2 wall-mounted ovens from a single 50-amp branch circuit. It is perfectly acceptable to do so. All right. So that was the application where you wonder, what does Table 220.55 Note 4 talk about when it says that you're allowed to do this? This is what you're doing. Okay. And it literally says that under Note 4 to 220.55, where it says you simply take the nameplates of all these, you add them all up, and then you treat it like a range, right? Okay. That's pretty much it, guys. We're only going to talk about that one during this episode. If you want to know about range calculations and all that good stuff, please go watch our video where I talk about ranges. And we also have one on dryers too, because there's a lot of things that sometimes are on exams that you have to be aware of when it comes for a range or a dryer that's being fed by a 3-phase system, and you need to understand how to do the calculations and all. So go watch that video to learn that. You'll get a lot of good information out of that. Okay? Well, that's all we're going to talk about in this episode. Try to keep it brief. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to email us at info@masterthenec.com, or you can email us at info@electricalcodeacademy.com. Visit our websites. On our website, you can get to all our social media. You can listen to podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube is where I like to listen to podcasts, to be honest with you. But there's Spreaker, all those type of things. But again, you can listen on our website. You can listen on FM, TuneIn, all these, just so many ways to listen to our podcasts now if you want to listen to them. So, but hopefully you got something out of this episode, how to do a countertop and wall-mounted ovens on the same branch circuit. And that are the rules. Just remember 210.19A3, exception number 1. Remember that we're talking about the application that is typically talked about in Table 220.55 and expressed under Note 4. And it is permissible to do this as long as the ovens and the cooktop is in the same room. Okay, they have to be in the same room. Makes sense, right? But they do have to be there. Okay? All right, so next time, folks, stay safe and God bless.
Every day the future's getting closer. Every day the future's looking bright. Every